I'm Emily. I was a 25-year-old living a quiet, unremarkable existence with my boyfriend Mike in a relationship that had seen better days. We'd been together since college, a pair drawn together more by familiarity than by the fervent passion of star-crossed lovers. Our arguments were frequent, often about Mike's disinterest in planning for the future or his latest gaming marathon that would last well into the early hours, leaving me to sleep alone. We were two people dancing around the inevitable conversation of, "Where's this going?" without ever actually taking the floor. It's not that we didn't care for each other. It's just that somewhere along the line, we stopped trying to make it work. My parents, Sue and George, were the antithesis of us. Married for over 30 years, they still exchanged loving glances and shared private jokes, their bond seemingly unbreakable. They were my foundation, the steadfast love I aspired to find for myself, even if it wasn't going to be with Mike. On the evening of the crash, I remember arguing with Mike over something as trivial as unsorted laundry. He had promised to do it, and once again, the promise was as empty as the laundry basket was full. "Can't you just do one thing you say you're going to do?" I had asked, exasperation straining my voice. "It's just laundry, Em. It'll get done. Eventually," he had replied, his attention fixed on his computer screen. The argument had fizzled out as they usually did, with neither of us truly addressing the underlying issues. Later, as I sat in the back seat of my parents' car, the warmth of their chatter was a soothing balm to the residual frustration from the argument with Mike. They were celebrating another year of Mom's life, and their joy was infectious. Then, the world turned on its axis. Headlights merged with the sound of metal on metal, and everything went black. When I awoke, it was to the antiseptic smell of a hospital, the relentless beeping of the heart monitor, and a heavy blanket of dread. The doctor's words were clinical and detached, but the message was clear. My parents didn't make it, and my legs, my perfectly normal, taken-for-granted legs, might never carry me again. The truth settled like a stone in my stomach. I was suddenly, terrifyingly alone. Mike, the man I had just argued with about laundry, was now my only connection to a life before the crash. The life where my biggest worry was whether he'd sort the whites from the colors. As the reality of my parents' absence and my potential paralysis began to truly register, a hollow despair took root in me. The future, once a landscape of possibilities, now seemed like a barren field. The hospital room was a bubble where time moved both too quickly and not at all. After what seemed like an eternity of white walls and echoing silence, Mike walked in, his parents, Janet and Bob, a step behind him. The atmosphere was thick with a somberness that made my heart sink even lower, if that was possible. Mike pulled a chair up next to my bed and took my hand, his usual bravado absent. His parents stood by the door, a united front of awkward concern. "Hey, Em," Mike began, his voice a rough whisper. "I've been doing some thinking, a lot of thinking, actually." "Thinking?" I echoed, my voice dull. "About what?" "About us," he said, and his eyes met mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. All of this, it's made me see how short life can be." I wanted to say something, to ask what he meant, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. "I don't want to wait for the perfect moment anymore because it might never come," he continued, squeezing my hand. "What I'm trying to say is, will you marry me, Emily?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. It was the last thing I thought I'd hear, especially now. I searched his face for a sign of the impulsive Mike I knew, the one who acted first and thought later. But all I saw was earnestness. His mother, Janet, stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "We want you to be a part of our family, Emily. We'll take care of you." "And it's not out of pity," Bob added quickly. "It's because we love you, and we want to support Mike in taking this step." I was stunned, my mind racing. This was a lifeline, unexpected, and maybe even a little reckless, but a lifeline nonetheless. I looked at Mike, really looked at him, and saw not just my sometimes immature boyfriend, but a man offering his support in the most uncertain time of my life. "Mike, My voice trailed off as I tried to gather my thoughts. "It's okay, Em. You don't have to decide right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel," he said, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of my hand. I thought about my parents, about the unwavering love and support they had always shown me. Wasn't this what they would have wanted? For me to be loved and cared for, no matter what? Mike, I don't know what the future holds for me, for us. But yes, I found myself saying, the words stronger than I felt. Yes, I'll marry you. A smile, the first genuine one I'd seen in days, spread across Mike's face. Janet let out a soft sob, covering her mouth with her hand, and even Bob's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Moving into my parents' house with Mike should have been a fresh start, a new chapter. The house was too big for just one person, and everywhere I looked, I saw memories of my parents. I thought having Mike with me would fill some of those empty spaces, but I was quickly learning that his presence was a reminder of what was missing, not a replacement. The first few days, he was attentive, always checking on me, making sure I had everything I needed within reach. But as days turned into weeks, the attentive husband act began to wear thin. Mike started spending more time on his computer, his headphones on, shutting me out. One evening, as I maneuvered my wheelchair into the kitchen, I found him staring blankly at his screen. "Mike, have you thought about looking for a new job?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "The insurance won't cover everything, and the bills are starting to pile up." He didn't look away from the screen. "I told you, Em, I'm taking care of you now. That's my job." "But I can take care of myself during the day," I pushed back, feeling a twinge of frustration. "You don't need to be here all the time." Finally, he turned to face me, his expression a mix of irritation and something else I couldn't quite read. "What do you want from me, Em? I'm here, aren't I?" I was taken aback by his tone. "Being physically here isn't the same as being present, Mike. I need a partner, not just a roommate." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile. "You know what, Em? Maybe I need more than this too. Maybe I wasn't cut out to be a nursemaid." His words stung, and I watched him storm out, the door slamming behind him. I was left alone in the silence of the kitchen, the weight of his words settling around me like dust. I wasn't just alone, I was lonely. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but think about how quickly our modest honeymoon period had ended. The vows we had taken felt like they were from another lifetime. The Mike who had lovingly promised to be by my side, in sickness and in health, seemed like a stranger now. As the weeks dragged on, his absences grew longer, and the excuses more flimsy. He was either out with friends or lost in a digital world that didn't seem to have room for me. I felt like an obstacle in his life, a burden he hadn't anticipated. One particularly tough day, when the pain was bad, and the house felt more like a mausoleum than a home, I heard the front door open. Expecting Mike, I called out, "Is that you?" "Yeah, it's me," he replied, his voice distant. "I'm just grabbing a few things, then I'm heading out again." I wheeled myself to the hallway, watching as he rifled through a drawer for his keys. "Going out with friends?" I asked, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. He paused, keys in hand, and sighed. "Em, I need some space, okay? It's not easy for me either, all this." I nodded, biting back tears. "I know. I just thought we could maybe spend some time together, like we used to." He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Maybe when things settle down a bit, I gotta go." The house felt emptier with each passing day, a vast space filled with silence and the ghost of better times. It wasn't just Mike's absence or the silence left in the wake of my parents' voices. It was the small things that started to go missing. A vase my mother loved, a silver frame holding a family photo, a painting that used to hang in the hallway. I first noticed it when I was trying to distract myself with memories. I wheeled myself into the living room, intent on looking through the photo albums. But as my eyes scanned the room, they fell on the bare patch of wall where the painting had been. Confusion knotted my brow. "Mike!" I called out, unsure when he had last gone out. There was no answer, and the emptiness of the house seemed to echo back at me. That evening, when Mike returned, I asked him, "Have you seen the landscape painting that used to be in the hallway?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "Oh, that old thing? Yeah, it was getting dusty, and I figured we could use the space for something else." Something about his casual dismissal didn't sit right with me. But it was my mom's favorite, I said, a tremor of unease in my voice. He shrugged, his attention still half on his screen. We can get another painting, Em. It's no big deal. But it was a big deal. The items that went missing next were unmistakable, things that had been in my family for years. One afternoon, I caught Janet, Mike's mom, in the act. She was bustling around the living room with a big black garbage bag. "Janet, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharp with alarm. She jumped, a guilty flush creeping up her neck. "Oh, just some spring cleaning, dear. This place is cluttered with so many old things." "But those are my things," I protested, my heart rate picking up. There, she cooed, her voice sickly sweet. "We're just making things nicer for you. You'll thank us later." I watched her like a hawk every time she visited after that, but the thefts became sneakier, more calculated. And every time I brought it up, I was met with reassurances that it was all in my best interest. One night, lying in bed, I turned to Mike, who was scrolling through his phone, as had become his nighttime ritual. "Mike, your parents have been taking things from the house. My things." He didn't look up. "Mom's just trying to help. You know she's got a knack for this stuff." "Help?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. "By taking my parents' belongings?" He sighed, finally setting his phone down and turning to face me. "Look, Em, they think we should be looking forward, not backward. They're just trying to take some of the load off you." I wanted to scream, to rage against the violation, the disrespect. But I was tired of fighting, tired of questioning my own sanity. "This isn't what I want," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. Mike reached over and patted my hand, a gesture that felt more patronizing than comforting. "Try to get some sleep, Em. Things will look better in the morning." I couldn't take it anymore and confided in Anna, my closest friend, who was also a massage therapist. She had been helping with my rehabilitation, her visits a rare source of relief. "Anna, things are going missing around the house," I confided as she worked on my stiff muscles. "And I can't shake the feeling that Mike and his parents are behind it." Anna paused, her hands stilling on my shoulders. "Have you talked to Mike about this?" "I have, but he just brushes it off. Says his parents are helping us by decluttering." I let out a hollow laugh. "But it's only my family's things that are disappearing." Anna's brows furrowed in concern. "That doesn't sound right, Em. Do you want me to do something? Maybe come by more often? Keep an eye out?" The idea sparked something in me, a plan forming from the embers of my frustration. "Could you, I don't know, maybe help me set up some sort of camera or something to record what's going on when I'm not in the room?" With a nod of determination, Anna agreed. "I'll bring something over tomorrow. We'll get to the bottom of this." True to her word, Anna came back the next day with some discreet recording devices, which she placed in strategic locations around the house. It felt like something out of a spy movie, and if I wasn't so desperate for the truth, I might have laughed at the absurdity of it all. A few days later, Anna returned with the recordings, and we sat down to listen. The voices of Mike and his parents filled the room, and the blood in my veins turned to ice as their scheme unfolded through their casual conversation. "And once we get her committed, the house and everything in it will be ours," Mike's voice said, clear and cold. "Yeah, the place will sell for a fortune, and all those antiques? Pure profit," his mother added, her tone greedy. "We just need to make sure Emily doesn't catch on before we have everything in place," his father chimed in. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to their betrayal. These people, who had promised to care for me, to be my family, were plotting against me. Anna reached over, her hand gripping mine tightly. "We have to do something, Em," she said, her voice laced with anger. I wiped my eyes, the sorrow quickly giving way to a steely resolve. "We will. I'm not going to let them get away with this." The morning after listening to the recordings, I tried to act normal, but every word they said, every smile they gave, felt like a lie. It was during breakfast when I noticed something was off. The usual noise of the city that drifted in through the open window was absent. I wheeled myself over to see what was happening, only to find that the ramps that allowed me access to the garden were gone. "Mike!" I called out, my voice laced with panic. "Where are the ramps?" He came into the room, feigning ignorance. The ramps? Oh, they were looking a bit worn. Thought they needed fixing. I stared at him, the man I thought I knew. And you didn't think to tell me? How am I supposed to get around? His gaze was evasive as he shrugged. I just thought you'd be safer inside for now. You know, until we get new ones. The room felt like it was spinning, and it wasn't from my injury. Safer? Or trapped? The words slipped out before I could stop them. He didn't respond, just turned and walked away, leaving me stewing in a mix of anger and helplessness. Later, when I asked Janet about it, she was syrupy sweet with false concern. We're just looking out for you, dear. We wouldn't want you to have an accident, she said, touching my shoulder with feigned tenderness. I pulled away from her touch, feeling the sting of their deceit. I didn't realize needing ramps qualified as a hazard, I replied, my voice steady though my insides were shaking. Janet's eyes hardened for a moment before she regained her composure. We're just trying to help, Emily. It's for the best. That night, as I lay in bed, the darkness felt oppressive. Mike was out again, probably drowning his guilt in cheap beer and cheaper thrills. I reached for my phone, the screen a small beacon in the dark, and dialed the number Anna had given me for emergencies. Anna, I whispered when she picked up. They've removed the ramps. I'm literally trapped in my own home. Her voice was firm, a lifeline in the tumultuous sea I was drowning in. Hang tight, Em. I'm going to make some calls. We're going to sort this out. Next day, I was in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell. My heart pounded as I maneuvered towards the entrance. It was Anna, flanked by a man and woman wearing crisp suits and stern expressions. They were from a local disability rights organization, here to assess my living situation. Beside them was my lawyer, Mr. Hammond, clutching a leather briefcase. Emily, we're here to make things right, Anna said, her determination matching the resolve in my chest. Mr. Hammond stepped forward. We need to establish the facts first, Emily. I'll need to see the house. Check against the inventory of your parents' belongings. As we moved through the house, the representatives from the service took notes, their disapproval clear at the missing ramps and the blatant disregard for my welfare. Mike walked in during the commotion, surprise etching his face. Em, what's going on? Who are these people? I looked at him, really looked at him, allowing the full weight of my gaze to settle on his shoulders. I'm taking back control, Mike. This is my lawyer, and these are advocates for people with disabilities. They're here to ensure my home is safe and that my rights are respected. Janet and Bob entered the fray, confusion turning to fear as they realized the seriousness of the situation. Emily, darling, what is this about? Janet's voice trembled. It's about my rights, my home, and the truth, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Mr. Hammond is here to confirm the inventory of my inheritance. Mr. Hammond opened his briefcase, pulling out documents and photographs. We have detailed records of all items bequeathed to Mrs. Harper. It seems several are missing. Bob's face paled. Now, Emily, I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I replied, the recordings Anna had provided playing in my head. And I have more than just missing items to discuss. Mike's parents looked at each other, the facade of the caring in-laws crumbling before my eyes. Mike stood there, silent, the reality of the situation dawning on him. Anna moved closer to me. We also have evidence of the conversations you've had regarding Emily's property and well-being. The advocates from the Disability Service spoke up. Removing access to the ramps is a direct violation of Mrs. Harper's rights. We'll be taking action. As Mr. Hammond laid out the evidence of their theft and their plans for my future, I saw the trap I had been in from the outside. But now, the tables had turned. I was no longer the victim in their game. I was the one calling the shots. Mike finally found his voice. I can explain. But I shook my head. Save it, Mike. I've heard enough. Janet started to cry, and Bob put an arm around her, but there was no comfort to be found in their deceit. The day of the trial was a culmination of everything I had endured. The courtroom was stark, the air thick with tension. Mike and his parents were on one side, looking nothing like the family that had once promised to care for me. I was on the other, with Anna beside me and Mr. Hammond at the ready, with his briefcase of evidence. As the proceedings began, the judge looked down at us from his bench, his gaze lingering on me for a moment. "We are here to examine the evidence regarding the allegations of theft and the premeditated exploitation of Emily Harper," he said. Mr. Hammond presented the recordings, the inventory discrepancies, and testimonies from the disability advocates. The evidence was damning, and Mike's family could do little but squirm under the weight of their own deceit. Janet sobbed quietly, her sobs a soundtrack to the unraveling of their scheme. "We never meant for things to go this far," she whispered, when it was her turn to speak. The judge's voice was firm as he addressed them. "You took advantage of a vulnerable person. There's no excuse for your actions." Mike stood, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Em. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at him, the history we shared playing out in a flash before my eyes. "Sorry isn't enough, Mike. You chose this path." The gavel came down like the final word on the life I had once known. Mike and his parents were found guilty. Reparations were ordered, and they were to have no further contact with me. With the help of Anna and a dedicated team, I started physical therapy. Each small movement was a victory, each step a testament to my resilience. My legs, once lifeless, began to tingle with new strength. One day, as I managed to stand with the help of parallel bars, Anna cheered me on. "Look at you, Em, you're doing it!" The smile on my face was mirrored in her own. "I am, aren't I?" The joy bubbled up from a place I thought had been broken beyond repair. And so I moved forward, one day at a time. The house, once a mausoleum of my past life, was slowly transformed back into a home, a sanctuary where I healed and grew stronger.